Hello, Namaskar, Vanakkam. In today's video, we will be studying The Cookie Lady by Philip K. Dick. A very intriguing story, a mysterious story, a story that makes you wonder what actually happened. And it's open to different kinds of interpretations as to what could have possibly happened. Philip K. Dick is known for these kind of stories, and I will do a bit of a summary of the themes because then it will become easier for you to understand the story. The story is fairly simple, but what happens at the end is what gives it a twist. But it is much more important, and especially since you are students of class 12, it is much more important for you to understand the small hints that the writer keeps dropping along the way. Because when you are analyzing it for the 5-mark and the 10-mark questions, you would need to kind of point out these kind of details. And that's always the difference between an absolute topper and also someone who scores in the 80% range. Okay, so let's get started with The Cookie Lady. Okay, so let me first go through that. In any case, what you should do is that in your book, page 140, please make sure that you always read this box item information that is provided. I'm not saying questions will come directly from this, but when you read this, it gives you a context it helps you understand the writer better, and that helps you understand the story or the poem that much better. You should make this a habit for all your stories and poems. Now, Philip K. Dick, who's an American writer, and he was known more by his initials PKD, was known for his highly imaginative and thought-provoking stories. Very prolific science fiction writer. Please include this when you're writing it if there is a question relating to the author. And is believed to have written over 40 novels or about 121 short stories. And this, The Cookie Lady, is one of his short stories. So how is his story genre actually described as? Speculative fiction or philosophical science fiction? We know about science fiction, but there is an element of philosophy as far as PKD's short stories are concerned, because there is an element of metaphysical themes. Metaphysical is something which includes physics, but there is an element of the supernatural. There is an element of things which cannot really be explained, because normally hota kya hai, physics includes things which can be explained. Isn't that true for most of science? But in this case, you really cannot explain what really possibly could have happened. Now, that's what happens. There is an element of reality in this particular story. See, essentially, there are two main characters and there are three other characters, minor characters, but two main characters. So there is an element of reality. But there is also an element of illusion, which really cannot be explained, normally. His narratives have intricate plots, small details, which make the story that much interesting. And there is also a lot of psychological depth. Please use all these phrases that I have used in these notes, because it will make your answer look that much better. Many of his stories have been adapted as films, as television series. So that has made him one of the foremost writers of the 20th century science fiction literature. Now, this was published in the 1953 June issue of the Fantasy Fiction magazine. As the name of the magazine indicates, that indicates to you the kind of story it is. Now, what's the story about? The protagonist is a small young boy called Bubber. He keeps visiting an elderly woman called Mrs. Drew, who makes cookies for him. Simple. Okay, great. Simple. Nice. Is it a children's story? No way. It is not a children's story. But there is something she's able to do with those cookies. And what happens at the end takes the reader by complete surprise. Now, I just created an image just for you to get an idea. This is the elderly woman, and she's making those cookies for young Bubber. Okay, so this is the kind of setting. So if you know the setting, and the house is not a great house. It's a slightly dilapidated kind of a house, not very well maintained. And you can see the walls, etc. It's not a very great looking house, neither the outside nor the interiors. Okay, so it gives you an image. Even the sofa that you are seeing, the couch that you're seeing is slightly old. It's not in brand new kind of a piece of furniture. Now, what are the themes of the story? Please pay attention. Mrs. Drew steals Bubber's youth through her cookies. That's what happens. And that highlights the human desire to recapture lost vitality and the potential darkness. I'm discussing the themes beforehand because I presume many of you would have already read the story. So you're familiar with the storyline. Someone wrote to me, oh, you killed the suspense. I don't think you would be coming here after not knowing the story at all. So let's discuss the themes because that will help you understand the story that much better. So lost vitality is because she's looking to kind of get back her youth, this elderly lady, Mrs. Drew, through her cookies and using Bubber as some kind of a medium. So the story explores the theme of youth, that you want to kind of go back, and the yearning. Yearning means the desire to rewind the clock back. You are 50, you want to be 25 again. So Mrs. Drew wants to recapture the vitality of youth, to feel young skin, because that's what she describes in the story also. And so where there are no wrinkles, her interactions and physical contact with the young boy is one way of doing it. So she's using that interaction as a way of recapturing her lost youth. So it reflects on the effects of aging on the psyche of a person. Please use all these phrases that I've used here. The story portrays an exploitative, and this is an extremely important phrase. Please use it. It's an exploitative relationship because she kind of tempts him with the cookies, but her entire design, her real intention is actually very, very sinister. It's very sinister. She's kind of taking advantage, exploiting the trust that Bubber has in her, that he comes to her house, without really telling his parents about it. So she uses Bubber for her own gain. And that raises the questions about manipulation. And from the point of view of Bubber, he's innocent, and that makes him extremely vulnerable also. Vulnerable to exploitation and manipulation by Mrs. Drew. Okay. This story left me quite disturbed because, pedophiles behave like this. Pedophiles essentially behave like this of, tempting the child with something and then taking advantage. Mrs. Drew draws this vitality from Bubber, and these interactions at frequent intervals, they destroy Bubber completely at the end. And this unnatural transformation, which really cannot be explained scientifically, it leaves you very disturbed. It's a very horrifying ending in that sense. The cookies are an important element because initially, it would seem that, Mrs. Drew is only looking for some kind of companionship. Her house is at the end of M Street, ELM Street. This boy also doesn't seem to be having friends. At least it's not shown in the story. So maybe they crave companionship, but we come to know that he will go anywhere where he can get some food. Okay, so thoda bhukkad aadmi hai, ladka hai. Okay, and Mrs. Drew exploits this weakness of Bubber. Okay, she uses the cookies as a bait to trap Bubber, and she leads a life. She doesn't indulge in any human interaction. Okay, and the neighborhood doesn't seem to be very fond of her. I mean, the parents of Bubber tell him, don't go to her house. They don't encourage any kind of interaction with her. The story, makes you wonder if Mrs. Drew is actually an evil person. Well, at the end, the way things happen, she does come across as an evil person. So the story can also be said it's a science fiction genre. It's also a horror science fiction genre. Because there is, all through you feel something abnormal is going to happen. There is that kind of hangs in the air. And there is the theme of temptation, because he's tempted by the cookies, because that's what he goes to her house for. And she's tempted by the prospect of using him to become young again. So the theme of temptation, the theme of emotional manipulation are all important themes as far as this story is concerned. I hope this kind of sets it up nicely for you. You will understand this that much better. Now that I've gone through the entire set of themes. Yeah. So about the two characters, Babar, his full name is Bernard Surley. Is a young boy who regularly visits Mrs. Drew's house, enticed by the prospect of eating tasty cookies. He reads out different books whenever she asked him to. She's an elderly woman who lived by herself in a dilapidated house, lonely existence, and therefore she looks forward to meeting Babar. The real reason, of course, is that she possesses the ability to become more young by physically changing herself by touching the boy and in his presence. So she needs his presence. He stopped, and that day she does this because he says, my father has forbidden me from coming here again. So she knows that this is her last opportunity, right? And that's what she does in an extremely sinister way at the end of the story. Okay. The parents of Babar, they don't approve of his visits to Mrs. Drew's house. There's another character called Ernie Mill, but he just has one line at the beginning who teases Babar about his visits to Mrs. Drew's house. Setting of the story, I've already spoken to you about. Her house, the fact that it's all, very messy kind of house, very shabby, unpainted, giving it a dilapidated feel. The porch steps, which are all sagging, the old weather-beaten rocking chair on the porch, the torn piece of cloth added to the feel. So in that sense, nothing is, nothing gives you the sense of being fresh and new. Okay. But Babar didn't seem to mind all this because he went for the cookies and he gets cooked at the end. I mean, metaphorically speaking. Okay. Abhi मैं सोचना कि cooking कहाँ होता है? Okay. This is yet another image which was created. Again, gives you an idea about what we are going to read about. Now let's dive into the story. Where are you going, Babar? Ernie Mill shouted from across the street, fixing papers for his route. Now, Ernie Mill is obviously someone who is known to Babar. Fixing papers for his route is a bit of an ambiguous kind of a sentence. It's not explained in the story. Maybe he's a delivery boy and he needs to kind of, he's fixing the papers so that he can deliver them on his route. That's possible. Or he's a courier or a delivery boy, or maybe he's delivering some travel documents. It's left open-ended. No one really explains that. No place, Baba Surle said. You going to see your lady friend? Ernie laughed and laughed. So it obviously means that he was being teased about it even before. Okay, what do you go visit that old lady for? Let us in on it. So he is making it seem like, there is something, shady going on out there. So he wants to kind of, it's very obvious that his visits are the object of mirth. Babar went on. He turned the corner and went down Elm Street. Already he could see the house at the end of the street set back a little on the lot. The front of the house was overgrown with weeds, old dry weeds that rustled and chattered in the wind. So now this particular paragraph that tells you about the location of the house is an important one. You need to remember this name and the fact that the front of the house was overgrown with weeds. So, it was not well maintained. Obviously, there was no gardener who was being employed to look after the garden. There were a lot of dry weeds that rustled, that is, made a noise and chattered in the wind whenever there was wind blowing. The house itself was a little gray. Now, it's not a bright color. So gray also conveys a sense of loneliness, a sense of being worn out, a sense of not being cheerful in any way. It was shabby and unpainted. So it has not been very well maintained. Shabby conveys poor condition and lack of care. The porch steps, this is pronounced as, the veranda kind of a thing. The steps were sagging, which means they were kind of, again, they needed some repair, some attention, some maintenance. Old weather-beaten. Weather-beaten means decay due to overexposure to the elements. It could be bright sunshine, rain, snowfall, whatever. Okay. And a rocking chair on the porch with a torn piece of cloth hanging over it. Sagging again means getting weaker. Babar went up the walk. As he started up the rickety steps, rickety means something which is shaky, which is kind of, not very stable. He took a deep breath. He could smell it. So you see, he's tempted by the smell of the cookies, the wonderful warm smell, and his mouth began to water, his heart thudding with anticipation. So he's kind of, looking forward to eating the cookies. Babar turned the handle of the bell. The bell grated rustily. Now this again, this is, the kind of imagery which has been used, the sound imagery, that, it was a very shrill kind of a sound which was created by the bell, by the doorbell on the other side of the door. There was silence for a time. Then the sounds of someone stirring, that is, someone moving inside. Mrs. Drew opened the door. She was old, very old, a little dried up old lady. So you see, the 3 times the word old has been used to re-emphasize the age of the lady, like the weeds that grew along the front of the house. So now, please note this. The lady compared with the weeds. Now, weeds are something. Now, this is the hint number 1. Weeds are something which are not healthy for a garden or a lawn, right? You need to remove the weeds, right? So this is the first indication that he's giving, a very subtle hint that he's giving, that she is like the weeds that grew along the front of the house. Please note this, okay? No one will tell it to you in this kind of minute detail. She smiled down at Babar, holding the door wide for him to come in. "You're just in time," she said. "Come on inside, Bernard. You're just in time. They're just now ready," referring to the cookies. Babar went to the kitchen door and looked in. He could see them resting on a big blue plate on the top of the stove. Cookies, a plate of warm, fresh cookies right out of the oven. Cookies with nuts and raisins in them. So she is obviously a good chef. She's able to prepare cookies which Babar likes. How do they look?" Mrs. Drew said. She rustled past him, that is, she moved past him into the kitchen. "And maybe some cold milk too? You like cold milk with them." So you realize that she is familiar with his tastes, because he has been coming there for over a month, as we will realize later in the story. So it is a regular kind of haunt. One more point I just want to point out, that the grating sound, grated rustling of the doorbell, it shows that one, the oldness of the doorbell, and it also gives you a sense of foreboding. The sound is not a pleasant sound. Otherwise, doorbells are generally a pleasant kind of sound. They are not screechy kind of sound. Ideally speaking, should not be, right? So nothing pleasant about the house. The one more point I want to just tell you. Okay. Rustled is in this case being used in the sense of moving. Usually it is used for leaves, dried up leaves, to convey both sound and movement. And this is hint number 2. Because this is precisely what happens to Babar at the end of the story. So this is hint number 2. Please keep making a note of this kind of very subtle hints that the author is dropping along the way. Then she poured a glass of milk for him and set some of the cookies on a small plate. "Let's go into the living room." Babar nodded. Mrs. Drew carried the milk and the cookies in and set them on the arm of the couch. Then she sat down in her own chair, watching Babar plop himself. That is, he's being very comfortable there. On the plate, plop himself down by the plate and begin to help himself, that is, start eating. Babar ate greedily, as usual, intent on the cookies, silent except for the chewing sounds. So he's not a great, there is no great conversation between the two. Mrs. Drew waited patiently until the boy had finished and is already ample size. So he's a plump boy and fond of eating. Bulged that much more. When Babar was done with the plate, he glanced toward the kitchen again at the rest of the cookies on the stove, almost as if to ask, "Why aren't you giving me those ones? I need to get them." "Wouldn't you like to wait until later for the rest?" Mrs. Drew said. "All right." So you realize that he kind of goes with it. He doesn't kind of argue saying that, "Mere ko abhi chahiye." "How are they?" "Fine." That's good. She leaned back in her chair. Well, what did you do in school today? How did it go? All right. So he's not a boy of many words. The little old lady watched the boy look restlessly around the room. Now he's restless because his intent, his focus is on the cookies. He's come there for the cookies. He's not really interested in making small talk. He's not really interested in striking up a conversation with the old lady. He's come for the cookies. He wants to eat it and get going. So that's why he is restless. Bernard, she said presently, won't you stay and talk to me? Won't you stay and talk to me for a while? He had some books on his lap, some school books. Why don't you read to me from your books? You know, I don't see too well anymore, and it's a comfort to me to be read to. Can I have the rest of the cookies after? So she wants to be read to because she wants his presence for a longer time at her house. Of course, Babar moved over towards her to the end of the couch. He opened his books, World Geography, Principle of Arithmetic, Hoyt Speller, which do you want? He asked. She hesitated. The geography. Babar opened the big blue book at random. Peru. Peru is bounded on the north by Ecuador and Colombia, on the south by Chile, and on the east by Brazil and Bolivia. Peru is divided into three main sections. These are, first, the little old lady watched him read, his fat cheeks wobbling as he read, the movement of the jaw, holding his finger next to the line, is this thing. She's observing him. She's not listening to him. She's observing him. She was silent, watching him, studying the boy intently as he read, drinking in each frown of concentration, every motion of his arms and hands. She relaxed, letting herself sink back in her chair. So just imagine, with the help of the photograph that I put, just imagine the scene before you. This is precisely what is happening. He's reading, she's listening. The words are there, but she's studying him intently. Okay. He was very close to her, only a little way off. So you see, what the author is managing to do is to create a sense of anticipation. You almost feel, because he's going into so much of intricate detail that you think, abhi kuch hone wala hai. Something is going to happen right now. There was only the table and the lamp between them. How nice it was to have him come. He had been coming for over a month now. So this detail is important. Ever since the day she had been sitting on her porch and seen him go by and thought to call to him, pointing to the cookies by her rocker as in the rocking chair. So that's how they met. He was going past her house, okay, and she called out to him saying that, would you like to have some cookies? Why had she done it? She did not know. She had been alone so long, and this points to her lonely existence, that she found herself saying strange things and doing strange things. This is hint number 3, that she was known to be doing strange things. She saw so few people only when she went down to the store, or the mailman came with her pension check, or the garbage man. The boy's voice droned on. Droned on means geography. He's just reading about Peru. She's not really bothered about whether he reads about Peru or reads about Pythagoras' theorem. Okay. She was comfortable, peaceful, and relaxed in his presence. The little old lady closed her eyes and folded her hands in her lap. And as she sat, dozing and listening, she's almost like half asleep, as though she's in a state of meditation. Something began to happen. The little old lady was beginning to change. So you see, there is some energy that she's able to draw from the boy. In this case, she's not even touching him. In the later instance, we will see that she holds his hand. But this time, she's just sitting very close to Babar, meditating, and there is a transformation that takes place, physical transformation. The little old lady was beginning to change, her gray wrinkles and lines dimming away. As she sat in the chair, she was growing younger. The thin, fragile body, fragile means something which is not very strong. She was growing younger, filling out with youth again. The gray hair thickened and darkened. So from the gray hair, it actually became black hair. The color coming to the wispy strands of hair. Her arms filled too. Okay, let me just see. Okay, wispy means feathery. Okay, wispy means feathery. So it's not something which is like, very strong, healthy hair. Her arms filled too. The mottled flesh. The mottled flesh. Mottled means marked with spots or some kind of color smears. Turning a rich hue. Hue means a shade, as it had been once many years ago. So her skin quality is improving. The quality of her hair has improved. The wrinkles are disappearing. So she is looking much more young again. Mrs. Drew breathed deeply, not opening her eyes. So she's in a state of meditation. She could feel something happening, but she did not know just what. Now, obviously, these are things which cannot really be explained, right? Something was going on. She could feel it, and it was good because she felt good becoming young once again. But what it was, she did not exactly know. She did not know that some power was enabling her to look young all over again. Okay. It had happened before almost every time the boy came and sat by her. Now, to the question that we had raised, was Mrs. Drew an evil person? On the face of it, because of what happens at the end, she does seem to be like an evil person. Because now she knows that something happens to her in the presence of Baba. And yet she goes ahead and does precisely that, right? At the cost of the life of Babar at the end. But here she says, what happened to her, she did not exactly know. It had happened before. So she was aware of the fact that this transformation does happen. And that's why she's sitting there close to Babar and almost meditating. Especially of late, since she had moved her chair nearer to the couch, she took a deep breath. How good it felt. The warm fullness, a breath of warmth inside her cold body for the first time in years. So because of her age, the body was cold. There's no warmth in the body. It happens with aging. In her chair, the little old lady had become a dark-haired matron of perhaps 30, a woman with full cheeks and plump arms and legs. So she had reduced by more than half her age possibly, because from what it seems she would be more than 60. So she had come down by more than half her age. Her lips were red again, her neck even a little too fleshy, as it had been once in the long forgotten past. So in great detail, the author has told you about the transformation that has taken place, the physical transformation that had taken place. And as a result of the physical transformation, the emotional transformation, because she's now beginning to feel good with her young body and appearance. Suddenly, he stopped reading about Peru and he's put down the book and stood up. He said, I have to go. Can I take the rest of the cookies with me? Because that's precisely what he's interested in. She blinked, rousing herself. She opened her eyes. Rousing means, getting up, The boy was in the kitchen filling his pockets with cookies. So he had already gone to the kitchen. She nodded, dazed, still under the spell, It was as though she had gone into some kind of a trance. As though she had gone into some kind of a trance. The boy took the last cookies. He went across the living room to the door. Mrs. Drew stood up. All at once, the warmth left her. And she was once again an old lady. She felt tired and very dry. She caught her breath, breathing quickly. She looked down her hands. They were once again very wrinkled and thin. Oh, she murmured. Tears blurred her eyes because she felt bad about the fact that she was once again her real age. It was gone again as soon as he moved away. She tottered. Tottered means to walk down as though you would fall, to walk around with difficulty to the mirror, because she now wants to see herself in the mirror above the mantelpiece and looked at herself. Old faded eyes stared back at her in the mirror reflection. eyes deep set in a withered face, gone, all gone as soon as the boy had left her side. So she realizes that it is the presence of the boy which is making this kind of a transformation possible in her body. I will see you later, Baba said. Please, she whispered, please come back again. Will you come back? Because she now wants, she knows that there is something which is happening magically, and she wants to have another opportunity to feel and become young all over again. So she almost pleads with him, please come back. Will you come back? Sure, he said listlessly, because listlessly conveys lack of interest. He'll come because he'll come for the cookies, right? He pushed the door open. Goodbye. He went down the steps. So there is no warmth from his side. In a moment, young boy doesn't really know those kind of manners and, basically how to kind of communicate, etc. In a moment, she heard his shoes against the sidewalk. He was gone. Babbar, you come in here. Miss Surlis, the mother, stood angrily on the porch of their house. You get in here and sit down at the table. All right. Babbar came slowly up to the porch, pushing inside the house. What's the matter with you? She caught his arm. Where you been? Are you sick? I'm tired. This is hint number 4. I am tired. Now, this boy has had a lot of delicious cookies. Why on earth should he be tired? He has been tired because she has taken away some of the youth. She has lost it because the connection was snapped. The connection between Babbar and Mrs. Drew was snapped. However, because of that energy going out of his body, he's feeling tired. That's hint number 4. I hope you're making note of all these things. He's dropping hints because that's what I didn't catch it the first time. The second time when I read it, I kept seeing that these are the very subtle hints that the author has dropped on the way. Rubbed his forehead as though, he's having some kind of pain. His father came through the living room with the newspapers in his undershirt. What's the matter? Look at him, Miss Surlis said, all worn out. Tired, worn out, conveying the same thing. What you been doing, Babbar? He has been visiting that old lady, Ralph Surlis said. Can't you tell? He's always washed out, worn out, tired, all conveying a sense of exhaustion, which means for the last 1 month, this had been happening continuously. This had been happening continuously, and his parents had actually observed, at least his father had observed. In the past, his mother had observed it today. He's always washed out after he has been visiting her. What do you go there for, Bub? What goes on? She gives him cookies, May said. You know how he's about things to eat, that he's someone who is always very happy to eat anything. He would do anything for a plate of cookies. And that includes going to that dilapidated house. Bub, his father said, listen to me. I don't want you hanging around that crazy old lady anymore. Do you hear me? I don't care how many cookies she gives you. You come home too tired. No more of that. You hear me? Babbar looked down at the floor, leaning against the door. His heart beat heavily, labored. So please make a note of all these words which convey his sense of exhaustion every time he goes to Mrs. Drew's house. I told her I would come back, he muttered. You can go once more, May said, going into the dining room, but only once more. So the mother is a little more lenient than the father. Tell her you won't be able to come back again, though. You make sure you tell her nicely. Okay, be gracious, be polite. Now go upstairs and get washed up. After dinner, better have him lie down, Ralph said, looking up the stairs, watching Babbar climb slowly, tired, his hand on the banister, the support. He shook his head. I don't like it, he murmured. I don't want him going there anymore. There is something strange about that lady. So the father is suspicious about that. There's something there because it seems to have a very tiring effect on his son. Well, it will be the last time. Hint number 6 of 7, whatever. No, I forgot the number. The last time. He indeed goes there for the last time. Wednesday was warm and sunny. Babbar strode along, his hands in his pockets. He stopped in front of McQueen's drugstore for a minute, looking speculatively. Speculatively means, wondering at the comic books. Should he buy, should he not buy kind of thing. At the soda fountain, a woman was drinking a big chocolate soda. The sight of it made Bubba's mouth water. Hungry once again. That settled it. He turned and continued on his way, even increasing his pace a little. Now you see here, he's not tired. He gets tired only after coming back, and then he regains his strength. So he's fine right now here. A few minutes later, he came up on the grey sagging push and rang the bell. Below him was the weeds blew and rustled with the wind. It was almost 4 o'clock. He could not stay too long, but then it was the last time anyhow. Okay, insisting on the last time, emphasizing on the last time. The door opened. Mrs. Drew's wrinkled face broke into smiles. Come in, Bernard. It's good to see you standing there. It makes me feel so young again to have you come visit. I don't even have to say it. He went inside looking around. He's looking for the cookies. I'll start the cookies. I didn't know that if you were coming. She padded into the kitchen. Okay. Means to walk to the kitchen. I will get them started right away. You sit down on the couch. Baba went over and sat down. He noticed that the table and the lamp were gone. So she had rearranged the furniture, which kind of, this small detail mentioned by the author and the fact that he observes it makes you wonder if there is something coming. He was looking at the chair in perplexity, means in a little confused manner, when Mrs. Drew came rustling back into the room. Now, rustling again, as I said, the word is again used for her. And rustle is, as I said, associated with dry, withered, fallen leaves. And that's precisely what happens to Bubba. So please kind of make a note of this. They are in the oven. I had the batter already. Now, she sat down in the chair with a sigh. Well, how did it go today? How was school? Fine. She nodded. How plump he was. The little boy sitting just a little distance from her, his cheeks red and full. She could touch him. He was so close. Oh God, it sounds so sinister. Her aged heart thumped. To be young again. So she now this time wants to use the opportunity, since it's going to be the last time, to become young. Youth was so much. It was everything. So her yearning for youth, she's yearning for youth to become young again. What did the world mean to the old? When all the world is old, lad, do you want to read to me, Bernard? She asked presently. I didn't bring any books. Oh, she nodded. Well, I have some books, she said quickly. I'll get them. She got up, crossing to the bookcase. As she opened the doors, Baba said, Mrs. Drew, my father says I can't come here anymore. 1 minute, I'll just cross-check this one. Okay, this word was not there. I don't know this. What this line is not there in your textbook. That's what I thought. It was not there. Oh, she nodded. Well, I have some books. She said quickly, I'll get them. She got up, crossing to the bookcase. As she opened the doors, Baba said she's giving him a book to read because so that she can prolong his stay at her house. Mrs. Drew, my father says I can't come here anymore. He says this is the last time. I thought I would tell you. She stopped, standing rigid. Everything seemed to leap around her. The room twisting furiously. Okay, of course. Sorry, she did not know that this would be the last time. I mean, usko nahi malum. Only now he says. She took a harsh, frightened breath. Bernard, you are not coming back? No, my father says not to. There was silence. The old lady took a book at random and came slowly back to her chair. After a while, she passed the book to him, her hands trembling. The boy took it without expression, looking at its cover. Please read, Bernard, please. All right. He opened the book. Where will I start? Anywhere, Bernard. I mean, she's kind of, she just wants him to read. She's not bothered about anything else. It was something by Trollope. She had only half heard the word. She put her hand to her forehead, the dry skin brittle and thin like old paper, which had almost like crack. She trembled with anguish. The last time. Baba read on slowly, monotonously. Against the window, a fly buzzed. Intricate details. Outside, the sun began to set. The air turning cool. A few clouds came up and the wind in the trees rushed furiously. The old lady sat close by the boy, closer than ever, hearing him read, the sound of his voice sensing him close by. Was this really the last time? Terror rose up in her heart because she would miss out on the opportunity to become young again, and she pushed it back. The last time she gazed at him, the boy sitting so close to her. She needs to draw all that energy from him in order to become young again. After a time, she reached out her thin, dry hand. She took a deep breath. He would never be back. There would be no more times, no more. This was the last time he would sit there. Babar. She touched his arm. Babar looked up. What is it? He murmured. You don't mind if I touch your arm, do you? No, I guess not. You should never allow a stranger ever to touch you. Never, ever. Remember this. Never, ever. Okay. I'm just going on a tangent. But these are things children should always be very careful about. No, I guess not. He went on reading. The old lady could feel the youngness of him flowing between her fingers. I'm reading it again. The old lady could feel the youngness of him, his youth, his vitality flowing between her fingers. The energy is flowing between her fingers as she's touching his arm, through her arm. A pulsating, vibrating youngness. These are very important key phrases. Okay, these are important keywords. A pulsating, vibrating youngness so close to her. It had never been so close where she could actually touch it. The feel of life. Beautiful phrase. The feel of life. Because she thought there was no life in her. Old, wrinkled, dry skin, like the weed outside. But he was young, and she thought he's life, she's not life. And the touch of that life made her feel very dizzy and very unsteady because this was a new kind of an experience for the old lady. And presently it began to happen as before. She closed her eyes, goes into a trance, goes into a meditative state, letting it move over her, becoming young all over again, filling her up, the warmth carried into her by the sound of the voice of the boy. So it is the sound and his sight, and in this case, the touch of the skin, which is having this dramatic, unexplained effect on her. The change, the flow was coming over her and the warm rising feeling. She was blooming again, filling with life, swelling into richness as she had been once long ago. She looked down at her arms. So now she looks down at her arms. Rounded they were, and the nails were clear, not like, when you become very elderly, the nails are clipped and they don't, they don't look young. Her hair was black again, heavy and black against her neck. She touched her cheeks. The wrinkles had gone. The skin pliant and soft, So there was this dramatic transformation that was once again happening, just like last time. And this was because of his presence, the touch, and his sound. Joy filled her, a growing, bursting joy. She stared around her at the room. So this time she opens her eyes and looks around. She smiled, feeling her firm teeth, unlike in elderly people where you lose your teeth, and gums, red lips, strong white teeth. So she had become 30 all over again. Suddenly she got to her feet, her body secure and confident. She turned a little, lithe, quick circle. Lithe is in a graceful way. Papa stopped reading. Are the cookies ready? He said. I will see. Her voice was alive, deep with the quality that had dried out many years before. Now, obviously, Babar cannot see the transformation. It is the transformation that she is feeling. But if she had indeed moved from a 70 to a 30, even Babar would notice that, oh, something dramatic has happened. You realize that he doesn't react to her differently. Now it was there again, her voice throaty and sensual. She walked quickly to the kitchen and opened the oven. She took out the cookies and put them on top of the stove. Already, she said gaily. Gaily means in a cheerful tone. Come and get them. Bubber came past her, his gaze fastened on the sight of the cookies. He did not even notice the woman by the door. He was not even looking at her. Mrs. Drew hurried from the kitchen. Now, this line would seem to indicate that he did not notice her, but it would seem a little strange that the boy will not notice a dramatic transformation as dramatic as it seems to have happened. It seems a little strange because he has looked at her and asked, whether the cookies are ready. Mrs. Drew hurried from the kitchen. She went into the bedroom, closing the door after her. Then she turned, gazing into the full-length mirror on the door. So she wants to see the transformation. Young. She was young again, filled out with the sap of vigorous youth. She took a deep breath, her steady bosom swelling, her eyes flashed, and she smiled. She spun, her skirts flying, young and lovely. So she's obviously feeling extremely happy, delighted. And this time it had not gone away. And that was the big difference. The age, she had not become aged once again. She opened the door. Bubba had filled his mouth and his pockets. He was standing in the center of the living room, his face fat and dull, a dead white. Hint number 7 or 8? 7, I think. A dead white. He's becoming old. What's the matter? Mrs. Drew said, I'm going. All right, Bernard. And thanks for coming to read to me. She laid her hand on his shoulder. Perhaps I'll see you again sometime. My father, he starts. I know. She laughed gaily, opening the door for him. Goodbye, Bernard. Goodbye. She doesn't need him anymore. She watched him go slowly down the steps, one at a time. Then she closed the door and skipped back into the bedroom. Skip means it's showing a sense of happiness. She unfastened her dress and stepped out of it. The worn gray fabric suddenly distasteful to her because as a young woman, she doesn't want to be wearing that kind of dull, gray, lifeless color. For a brief second, she gazed at her full, rounded body, her hands on her hips. She laughed with excitement, turning a little, her eyes bright. So you need to know that how she reacts both times. The first time when she becomes old again, and this time when she does not become old again. So you need to make a note of all the keywords that have been used by the author so that you can use them in your answers. What a wonderful body, bursting with life. Because she's young, 30 years old. A swelling breast, she touched herself. The flesh was firm. She was so many things to do. She gazed about her, breathing quickly, so many things. She started the water running in the bathtub and then went to tie her hair up. The wind blew. Now that's the end as far as Mrs. Drew's house is concerned. Now comes the sinister part. The wind blew around him as he trudged home. So he's walking around back home slowly. It was late because we have been told that the sun was setting. Now it had already set. And the sky overhead was dark and cloudy. The wind that blew and nudged against him was cold. And it penetrated through his clothing, chilling him. So you see, there is warmth as far as Mrs. Drew is concerned now. But as far as Bubba is concerned, you see all the elements that he's talking about. Darkness, no sunshine, cold, and strong wind. Everything which is a little negative and a little scary. The boy felt tired. His head ached and he stopped every few minutes. So you see, it's having the same effect of exhaustion on him, rubbing his forehead and resting, his heart laboring. Please make a note of all these phrases. He left M Street and went up Pine Street. Okay. The wind screeched around him. So it's very windy, pushing him from side to side. He's a young boy after all. He shook his head, trying to clear it, trying to still walk around clearly. How weary he was means how tired he was, how exhausted he was, how tired his arms and legs were. He felt the wind hammering at him, pushing and plucking at him. So the wind is a huge element which is playing. It's almost like the wind is an extension of Mrs. Drew. Mrs. Drew has sucked the energy out of him and left him at the mercy of the strong wind. He took a breath and went on, his head down. At the corner, he stopped, holding on to a lamppost. The sky was quite dark. The street lights were beginning to come on. At last, he went on, walking as best he could. Where is that boy? Miss Surley said, going out on the porch for the 10th time. So she's worried. She's extremely worried. Ralph flicked on the light and they stood together. The parents are worried, as they should be. What an awful wind. The wind whistled and lashed at the push. The two of them looked up and down the dark street, waiting to see the boy, but they could see nothing but a few newspapers and trash being blown along. Let's go inside, Ralph said. He sure is going to get a licking. Licking means he's going to get a pasting, means usko maar padne wali hai when he comes home, gets home. They sat down at the dinner table. Presently, May put down her fork. Listen, do you hear something? Ralph listened. Outside against the front door, there was a faint sound, a tapping sound. He stood up. The wind howled outside, blowing the shades in the room upstairs. I will go see what it is. So the sun has come, but the sun has been reduced to rags. He went to the door and opened it. Something gray and dry was blowing up against the porch, carried by the wind. He stared at it, but he could not make it out. A bundle of weeds and rags blown by the wind, perhaps. So there is that dried up vegetation, which is what Babur has been reduced to as a result of his horrific interaction with Mrs. Drew. The bundle bounced against his legs. He watched it drift past him against the wall of the house. So he's entering the house. Then Ralph closed the door again slowly. What was it? May called. Just the wind, Ralph solicited. So it ends in an unexplained manner, that he has been reduced to weed and rags, that with that kind of, rustling kind of a sound which has been created, because that's what draws the attention of the mother, that there was some kind of a sound which was made with the wind howling outside, right? So that's how the story ends. So what happened to Babur? It is an ambiguous ending which leaves room for interpretation, right? And which leaves room for interpretation. Mrs. Drew has obviously undergone a dramatic transformation at the expense of Babur, and Babur has been reduced to weed and rags. Okay, that scatters in the air like dried up vegetation. So her entire rejuvenation, in a way, has come at the expense of Babur, who has been reduced to nothing. His parents can't even see him anymore. So it is a very unsettling kind of theme. I feel very disturbed reading this, explaining this. So his innocence and his temptation for cookies lead him to this kind of an ending. So Mrs. Drew seems to have some kind of unexplained powers, which she may not have been aware of in the initial interactions, but gradually she realizes that this is something which happens to me every time this boy comes to my house and reads. So his presence and his sound seem to have that kind of an impact on me. The cookies, they convey kindness, that she feeds him delicious cookies, but they are the vehicle for something extremely sinister, because she tempts him with the cookies, and this is what happens to Babur at the end, right? So I hope the story is clear. I hope you enjoyed the story. You understood the larger themes, and of course, as I said, it is open to interpretation on what do you draw from something like this. But all the intricate details are something which you need to pay attention to in great detail. Thank you very much. Tata, bye bye. God bless you.